Children detained, families traumatized. The truth about ICE and our broken system across the United States. A tragedy is quietly unfolding, one that rarely makes the front page but strikes at the very heart of our nation's moral conscience. It is happening not in some distant country or war zone, but here at home, under the watch of agencies sworn to protect people, not terrorize them. It is happening to children. Innocent, vulnerable, defenseless children. Many of you have likely already seen the national news about a 5-year-old child named Liam, who made headlines after being detained alongside his parent. The story was heartbreaking to read, heart-wrenching to watch, and infuriating to understand. Yet, the truth is that Liam's story is not isolated, and it is certainly not happening far from us. Every day, families in America are being ripped apart by policies and practices that claim to target the worst of the worst, but in reality, ensnare the most vulnerable among us. Consider the story of Deanna, a 7-year-old student at Alder Elementary. On Friday, January 16, Deanna and her family, the Crespo Gonzalez family, were detained while arriving at Portland Adventist Hospital. They were seeking medical care, a basic human right for a sick child. Like any loving parent would do, they were trying to protect their child, to do the right thing, and to secure the care that Deanna desperately needed. Instead, they were met by 3 unmarked vehicles, ICE agents who surrounded them and taken into custody. Their car, their belongings, and their sense of safety were left behind in an instant. The scene is horrifying when you picture it. A child, sick and frightened, suddenly removed from everything familiar, while law enforcement stands over the family as though they were criminals. Deanna was initially denied medical care. Only after significant delay was she able to receive treatment, and thankfully she is now recovering. But the fact that a child had to wait, was denied immediate care, is unacceptable, unconscionable, and morally wrong. Every day that children are held in these conditions, their health, their safety, and their dignity are at risk. A pattern, not an anomaly. Deanna is not alone. Liam, the 5-year-old previously reported, is now in the same detention center in South Texas. Both children are being held in a facility meant for adults under the guise of family detention, a system designed to isolate and intimidate. This is not a hypothetical problem. It is happening now, to real children who deserve the same rights, care, and protections as any child in this country. What is most striking is the mismatch between the stated purpose of ICE enforcement and the reality on the ground. Officials claim that these policies are aimed at the worst of the worst, criminals, dangerous individuals, threats to public safety. But what we are seeing is children being traumatized, families shattered, and parents being criminalized for seeking basic health care. Think about that for a moment. A parent sees that their child is sick and needs help. They go to a hospital, a place designed to heal, to protect life, and they are punished for it. That is not justice. That is cruelty masquerading as law enforcement. The human cost on a personal level, stories like Deanna's hit me deeply. As a parent, I cannot fathom the terror, confusion, and helplessness that comes with doing everything right, everything to protect your child, and seeing it turn into trauma inflicted by the system. I cannot imagine the fear in a child's eyes as they are ripped from their family, the confusion as they are told they are in detention, the sheer panic of not knowing when, or if, they will return home. For Deanna and Liam, their lives have been disrupted in ways that are permanent and scarring. Developmental psychologists warn that even brief separation from caregivers can cause long-term emotional, cognitive, and social damage. Every day they are detained, they are exposed to stress and uncertainty that no child should ever endure. This is not who we are supposed to be as a country. America prides itself on being a beacon of freedom, a place where children are protected, nurtured, and given the opportunity to thrive. Yet, under these policies, we are punishing innocence, denying care, and sending a message that children are disposable if they are connected to families that are considered inconvenient. The policy lies exposed. ICE and federal authorities justify these detentions under the pretext of removing dangerous criminals. But let's be clear, there is nothing criminal about a child seeking medical care. There is nothing dangerous about a 5-year-old or a 7-year-old simply being alive. And there is nothing acceptable about a system that treats families as targets rather than as human beings deserving of compassion. This policy is a lie. When officials claim they are arresting the worst of the worst, they are not telling the truth. Deanna and Liam are living proof that this rhetoric is a cover for policies that inflict trauma on innocent families. There is no justification, no moral or legal defense for holding children in detention when they pose no threat to society. Why the system fails children? The failure here is not accidental, it is systemic. Family detention centers are designed for efficiency, not care. Children are kept in environments that are overstimulating, isolating, and often unsafe. Access to doctors, mental health support, education, and even basic recreational activities is limited or non-existent. Parents are criminalized for attempting to do what is right. Seeking medical attention, advocating for your child, simply being present in their life, all of these are treated as infractions. The very institutions meant to protect children are instead agents of fear and oppression. And make no mistake, these policies disproportionately affect families who are already vulnerable: immigrant families, low-income households, and people of color. This is not just policy failure, this is structural injustice. The broader moral imperative we must ask ourselves: what kind of country do we want to be? One that locks up children for being sick, or one that protects them as they grow? One that punishes parents for loving their children, or one that supports families in crisis? The story of Deanna and Liam is not an isolated news item. It is a reflection of our national values, our priorities, and our humanity. Every child detained, every parent criminalized, and every family traumatized is a failure of the system, and a failure of us as a society if we remain silent. What must change? The answer is not complicated. We must demand immediate release of children from detention. Children belong in homes, classrooms, playgrounds, not behind fences and walls. Access to medical care without threat of detention. Families seeking health care should never be treated as criminals. Accountability for policies that harm children. Officials must be held responsible for designing and enforcing practices that inflict trauma. Supportive, humane alternatives. Community-based programs, case management, and safe, monitored family housing provide security without cruelty. These are not radical ideas. They are basic standards of human dignity. A call to conscience. The story of Deanna and Liam is devastating, but it is also a call to action. We cannot remain passive. We cannot allow our country to continue punishing innocents. We cannot normalize cruelty simply because it is convenient for bureaucracies or convenient for political agendas. Every citizen, every parent, every advocate, and every community member has a stake in this. If we fail to speak up, we become complicit. If we allow children to be detained while seeking care, we are sending a message that their suffering is acceptable, that their rights can be ignored, and that our moral compass has failed. We must demand a system that prioritizes health, dignity, and safety over fear, control, and punishment. We must recognize that children are not collateral damage in political battles. They are human beings, and they deserve protection. A personal reflection: as I reflect on Deanna and Liam's stories, I cannot separate the human cost from the political rhetoric. I see fear in the eyes of children. I see parents trying to do the right thing, only to have their lives upended. I see a system that claims to protect, but instead punishes. We are better than this. We must be better than this. Compassion, humanity, and justice are not optional values. They are the foundation of a society that can truly call itself free. Children deserve compassion, not cruelty. Deanna, Liam, and countless other children detained in family facilities are not statistics. They are living, breathing human beings whose futures are being shaped by choices made by policymakers, federal agents, and administrators far removed from their suffering. This is not who we should be as a nation. Our immigration system should never come at the expense of a child's health, dignity, or sense of safety. The fact that this is happening here in America should shock every conscience and inspire every citizen to action. For Diana, for Liam, for every child who deserves to simply be a child, we must demand change. We can do better. We must do better. Minneapolis and America at a breaking point. The truth about federal force, civil rights, and what comes next, the story unfolding in Minneapolis, is not just another headline. It is evidence of something deeper and more dangerous, a rift between government power and the people it is supposed to protect. What began as a federal immigration enforcement operation has turned into one of the most significant civil rights confrontations in recent American history. This is a turning point, and the public needs to understand exactly what is happening, why it matters, and what is at stake for every citizen who cares about justice, democracy, and human dignity. This is not opinion. This is what verified reporting and public records show. The fatal shooting that sparked national crisis on January 7, 2026. A 37-year-old Minneapolis resident named Renee Nicole Good was shot and killed by an agent from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, during a federal immigration enforcement action in the city. The incident happened in broad daylight on a busy street in South Minneapolis. Good was in her vehicle near where federal agents were operating when an ICE officer fired multiple shots, striking her in the chest, arm, and head. The Hennepin County Medical Examiner subsequently ruled her death a homicide resulting from multiple gunshot wounds inflicted by a law enforcement officer. The names and details matter because Good was not a suspect in any violent crime, and there was no independent evidence that she posed an imminent threat. She was a United States citizen, a parent of 3 children, a poet, and by all accounts, a human being with a life, a community, and people who loved her. Conflicting narratives from federal officials immediately after the shooting. Federal authorities presented a narrative that Good's vehicle was used in a way that threatened officers. This version was widely reported in official statements, and some federal spokespeople insisted that the agent acted in self-defense. However, local leaders and independent observers challenged this explanation. Minneapolis officials, including the mayor, publicly rejected the federal narrative, calling it misleading and inconsistent with available evidence. The mayor said that, in his view, the federal account did not match what could be seen on video and what witnesses described. The result is a stark split. Federal statements that justify the use of force and local leaders and thousands of residents who see this as reckless, unjustified violence against an unarmed civilian. Investigative roadblocks and accountability questions. One of the most serious concerns surrounding Good's death is how the ensuing investigation has been handled. Originally, Minnesota's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, was set to investigate the shooting jointly with the FBI, as is common in cases where a civilian is killed by force. However, the U.S. Attorney's Office intervened and removed the state agency's access to evidence, interviews, and the investigative file. As a result, Minnesota law enforcement withdrew from the investigation because they could not meet legal standards without full access. This decision, cutting out local investigators, has deep implications for public trust. When state officials cannot review the evidence, the people they represent are left wondering whether powerful federal agencies are holding themselves to the same standards expected of local police. That questioning is not abstract. It is tied directly to whether justice will ever be seen to be done in Good's case. Then something extraordinary happened. An FBI agent who had been supervising the investigation reportedly resigned because of internal pressure and disagreements over how the case was being handled. This signals internal conflict within law enforcement itself about how to pursue accountability. Perhaps most striking of all, the U.S. Department of Justice has stated that it does not currently plan to open a civil rights investigation into the shooting. That puts the federal agent who fired the shots, still identified publicly, outside of normal accountability mechanisms for potential civil rights violations. That degree of protection, for one of the only people not facing investigation, has shocked many Americans and civil rights advocates alike. Public response. Protests, economic boycotts, and mass mobilization when people don't see justice, they take to the streets. That is precisely what happened. On January 23, tens of thousands of people across Minnesota participated in what organizers called the Day of Truth and Freedom. The event was both a protest and a coordinated economic boycott, a refusal to go to work, school, or shop to demand accountability, transparency, and the removal of ICE operations from Minnesota. These protests were not isolated. Demonstrations and solidarity actions were reported in cities including New York, Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago, Washington, D.C., and more. The depth of engagement reflects the sense of urgency felt by people nationwide about how this case is being handled and what it says about federal power and human rights. Federal enforcement surge and additional shootings, Good's death was not an isolated incident. Federal authorities have been conducting a large-scale immigration enforcement operation in Minneapolis, described publicly as one of the biggest federal actions of its kind in years. According to federal figures, thousands of arrests have been made under this operation. Yet at least one additional shooting involving federal agents was reported in Minneapolis after Good's death. Officials confirmed that an unidentified person was shot by federal law enforcement in a separate incident, again heightening tension and fear among residents. These repeated confrontations have turned neighborhoods into places where people now fear routine interactions, not just isolated moments of crisis. Why this moment matters. Rights, trust, and power at a deeper level, the Minneapolis situation highlights fundamental questions about American democracy, civil rights, and the rule of law. When a federal agent kills a civilian, and that civilian is a legal citizen, the expectation in this country is that an unbiased and transparent process will determine whether the use of force was lawful and justified. That expectation is not a luxury or an abstraction. It is how a free society ensures that power is not wielded without consequence. But when state investigators are blocked, federal agencies assert control over the narrative, and civil rights probes are declined, something larger is happening. People feel they have been excluded from the justice system, not protected by it. That loss of faith is dangerous. When citizens stop believing that institutions will operate fairly, it erodes trust in the entire system. This has consequences far beyond Minneapolis. It reaches every community that has ever felt ignored by law enforcement, every immigrant who has ever feared arbitrary detention, every family who has watched headlines about violence without clear accountability afterward. What happened here is not just a local tragedy. It is a national moment that tests what justice means in the United States. What independent experts are saying. Human rights organizations have been critical of how this case has been handled. They point to patterns of force used by immigration enforcement in other states and call for independent oversight and hearing from Congress. Without impartial investigation and transparency, the credibility of government institutions is at stake. These expert assessments matter because they are not partisan talking points. They are rooted in decades of legal standards about how use of force cases are evaluated and how civil liberties are protected. Looking forward, what needs to happen the future of this case and of public confidence in federal law enforcement depends on several things: independent and transparent investigation. The public needs access to all evidence, witness statements, and a clear legal standard for reviewing the use of deadly force, clear accountability standards. When law enforcement kills a civilian, there must be an objective process that the public trusts. A reset of how federal agencies operate in local communities. Sending heavily armed agents into cities without clear community coordination and oversight will only deepen mistrust. Public participation and civic engagement. Citizens, activists, and community leaders must have a voice in shaping the outcome so that justice is not just done, but is seen to be done. Only through those steps can faith in the system be restored. Conclusion. A turning point for America, the death of Renee Good and the aftermath in Minnesota are signs of something larger than one tragic incident. They reveal deep tensions over federal power, civil liberties, and whether government institutions protect all people equally. They raise urgent questions. When a government agent takes a life, whose story gets heard? When investigators are blocked, who decides what the truth is? When justice seems selective, what happens to democracy? These are not rhetorical questions. They are real issues with real consequences for every American. This moment demands clarity, accountability, and action. If you also support democracy and freedom, feel free to join me in this fight. Click follow, click subscribe, and join me. Divided we fall, and together we can knock down mountains. Through unity is the only way we can make a change. Thank you, stay safe, God bless, I love you all. Crowning Thoughts, True Speaker, copyright 2025 by Santiago D.C. Maria, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution.